Hi Foxes, and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. My name is Brittany from SHOPFOXBURROW. I am SHOPFOXBURROW on Poshmark, Instagram, and Etsy. And on this channel, I like to do a little bit of educational content mixed with some fun content. And today's video is more educational, so if you like to learn about vintage, about selling online, about Poshmark, about Etsy, then please do hit the subscribe button down below. I really appreciate it. And today we are going to be talking about something that I get a lot of questions about, and that is how do you price vintage? So this is a bit of a long video, going to be talking a little bit, but stick with me because when you come out the other end, you are going to have 3 different strategies that you can use to price your vintage items. As with all presentations, I have my little cheat sheet here, so if you see me looking down, that is what I'm looking at. Just want to make sure that I don't go off on a tangent. But to start off with, before I jump into telling you about the different pricing strategies that you can use to price your vintage, I want to talk about why the price that you are going to be asking for your vintage is worth it. So there's a lot of things that goes into sourcing and selling vintage. First of all, it takes time. Whether you're researching estate sales, you're driving to different thrift stores, you're checking out antique shops, you're hitting up the flea market, it takes time to go and find all of that stuff, and you need to value your time and not let other people intimidate you into thinking that you should be asking less because you may have paid a smaller amount for the item. Another thing that really goes into pricing vintage is scarcity. So for so much of this stuff, it's one of a kind. You maybe can find the same 80s dress for sale online, but something from the 1940s, almost all of that was made to order for the buyer. It's going to have specific measurements, specific pattern cuts. It is completely unique. So if someone wants your item, they will pay for it. You will probably get people who would buy it at a lower price, but you are looking for the buyer that is going to come along and pay for that item at the price that you are asking and the value of the item. Another thing that goes into selling vintage is cleaning. I have almost never found a vintage item that doesn't have some sort of flaw here or there. Maybe, 1 in 10 pieces doesn't need some sort of little touch up. But for the most part, they're going to need to be washed, and you're going to need to know how to care for those different fibers. They're going to need mends, they're going to need repairs, they're going to need period-specific buttons replaced, and the vintage seller who really sells vintage for a living is going to have all of that knowledge and all of that stuff on hand. For example, if I am replacing a zipper in a 1940s dress, I am trying to use a period-specific zipper to replace that dress. And as such, when I go to estate sales or I go to thrift stores and I see period-specific zippers, I purchase them and pick them up, and I have bins and bins of vintage sewing notions, bias tape, just all kinds of vintage thread, all kinds of things that you might need to repair vintage garments in a period specific way. So it will, if you have a dress from, let's say, the 1930s and it has a side zipper that would most likely be metal, and you replace it with a modern nylon plastic zipper, that does bring down the value a little bit. Now if you replaced it with a period specific 1930s zipper, that maintains the integrity of the item for the vintage collector. They're not going to be as upset about that. In fact, they will probably be grateful that you had the knowledge and the item that was needed to replace that zipper. So cleaning and repairs take knowledge. Then you've got the time spent finding the item, researching the item, photographing it, listing it, and getting it out into the world. So without you, that vintage item would still be sitting somewhere not for sale. So you have to remember that you were the one who found it, who loved it, who brought it in, who cared for it, who got it back online and out there in the public so that other people could purchase it and see it. And that has value. And then, of course, the presentation. have a nice photography setup and you take nice pictures, you put measurements out there, everything is clean, the buyer knows that they're going to purchase it, they're going to get it, it's going to be as described, that has value too. So when I'm looking online for vintage and I see someone who just tossed a dress up on a hanger in their bedroom against a closet door, or even worse, on the floor, and they're asking full, vintage retail asking price for that item, I won't buy it on principle, just because there's so much that goes into selling vintage that these vintage sellers are putting in that kind of effort, and that's why they can charge the prices that they're charging. So just keep all of that in mind when we go over these pricing strategies, and then you have to decide kind of what level you're at and take that into account when you are pricing your vintage. So the first method is the one that I used and developed when I was a fledgling vintage seller back in 2012. I came up with this strategy because of two reasons. One, it seemed to get me about on par with other comparable listings for my era and category. And two, it made sure that I would never lose money on a piece that I purchased and put up for sale. So the way that this method works is that you take the buying price of an item and multiply it by 6.5, and then you round up. So let's take, for example, a blouse that you purchased for $5. You multiply it by 6.5 and you've got $32.50. So you round up to $33, and that's going to be your asking price. Now, if you want to discount that item, you can discount it up to 75% off and still make back the price you paid and a little bit extra for fees and costs that are associated with selling. You are not going to be making back your time, but you will not be losing money directly on the item itself. So let's just take that example again. $5, 30 equals, $33 when you do the math, and then 75% off of $33 is $8.25. So if your item cost was $5, that leaves you $3.25 to take care of your fees, whatever platform that you're using. At that sell price, that should cover your fees. So that is scalable up until a certain point. When you start to spend a lot of money on pieces, like maybe you're going to a vintage fair or you're buying to resell on eBay or something like that, then this method might not work. But if you are purchasing your items at a thrift store, not a Goodwill outlet, but a thrift store, this pricing structure should pretty much work for you. So 6.5 times your item cost and then round up. So let me show you an example of a piece where that would work. So this is a top. It is by Amy Barr, and it's from about the 1960s. And it's a nice pastel plaid color, but there's nothing truly spectacular about it aside from the plaid. The brand name is nothing specific. So this would be a good candidate to use the 6.5 times method and to price it that way. Another thing you want to keep in mind when you're doing this method is if you looked at this blouse online, someone had it priced for $33, would you be outraged? And the answer is going to be no. I mean, you wouldn't be outraged, especially if you were on Poshmark and you were able to make offers. I think that that's a perfectly fair price for a vintage piece from the 1960s. All right, so now we're going to talk about a couple of things that make vintage items more desirable and as such worth more money. The first is going to be the fabric content. So while vintage items often don't have a fabric content, if you get good enough at selling clothing, you can usually tell. So natural fibers like cotton or silk, wool, cashmere, all of those are going to be worth more money than their synthetic counterparts with the exception being wartime era, 1930s, 1940s cold pressed rayon. So if you don't know what that is, go ahead and Google it. But anyway, it was a specific type of fabric that came into heavy use during the wartime period when natural fibers were more regulated because they needed them for war efforts. So they developed a way to print on this synthetic rayon, and the print colors that they can get with the printing process and rayon was spectacular. They did a lot of great stuff with just shape and tailoring and just details on these dresses. So 1930s cold press rayon, that's going to be definitely as equivalently valuable as like silk would be. Another thing that makes a vintage garment worth more is pockets. Women love pockets. People really love to be able to, you know, put their phone in their pocket or toss their keys in there. And it definitely adds to the value of the piece. Another thing is fine details. So bra stays, which are little snaps that go in the shoulders up here to keep your bra straps in place. Waist stays, which if you have a strapless dress, there's going to be a structural part at the waist that you can cinch on, and that just prevents the bodice from sliding down while you're wearing it. Special details, structural details like trims and you know, scalloped edging, or like a unique collar, or plackets that are done in a unique way. So special details about a piece are gonna add to the value rather than just like a classic or simple cut. Unique or novelty prints and border prints. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of those in just a minute so that you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. And then designers of note. So if you find something that is done by a designer and that designer is notable in some way, that can add to the value of your piece. And then of course, especially for 70s and beyond, trendy or desirable pieces, let's say 1970s prairie dresses or oversized 80s sweaters, or, you know, just specifically desirable pieces from each era, those are going to have a little bit more value because of their trendiness. But on the same hand, that value is not going to stick around forever. It is only going to be a little extra valuable as long as those items are still trendy. Another thing that adds to value that people would argue is size. So larger sizes are going to be more desirable because they're harder to find. I personally don't like to price things differently based on size because I think it is sizist and unfair. But you will find some people that feel like because a 1950s dress is on the larger side, that it should go for more money. I do not personally feel that way, but I wanted to throw that out there. So I'm going to show you a couple of novelty pieces just so that you kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. And before I start to show you all of these pieces, let me just disclaim that these are from my personal collection and they are not for sale, so I am sorry in advance if you fall in love with something, but most likely it is not for sale. So this is a 1950s top. It has these great dolman sleeves. It is like a kind of wool type knit. And if you get close to it, you can see it has little phones and phone books with little rhinestone inset details and a velvet collar. And it says, "Hello, New York. Hello, Paris. Hello, hello." And the buttons are little hearts in alternating red and black colors. And then you can see here, if you look closely, can you see that? There is tailoring down here at the hem, and that is meant to make, you see how the button stops right here? And there's still all this fabric? This would be tucked into a skirt. So this would not be worn with like pants or anything like that. And then here at the sleeve, you can see how it's gathered to be like a nice drape at the top but tapered when worn. And so a piece like this, because of the completely amazing print, the inset rhinestones, the velvet accent, the alternating metal heart buttons, and just the very nice construction of it. It does have a tag. It is an original Debcraft. You see that? Okay. So anyway, a piece like this would be a novelty print. Okay. Also in terms of novelty print, this is a 1940s cold pressed rayon dress. It has little mushrooms on it. You can see it has scallop trim here. So when I talk about like fine details on a piece, see this is all scalloped as well. That is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about pieces that make it special, nice tailoring. You see it's got this, forget what you call that, but it is a added waist detail, so it has enough detail here that you don't need to wear a belt. And it has crochet trim down here on the hem that has been inset into the dress. The back, I'm not sure if these are Bakelite. I've never tested them. I don't think they are, but they are just little buttons with like a star print in them. And so the back buttons up. So that is how this dress closes. That is another fantastic detail to look for. You can see all of this beautiful tailoring here. And yes, just wonderfully made. This is what a hem from that time period is going to look like. This is hand stitched on there with like a, they machine stitched this piece, this light pink piece, and then hand basted it onto this dress so that when you look at it from the outside, it is what's called an invisible hem. So you can barely tell that there is a hem there. And that is also another fine detail from this time period. But yes, this is also a novelty print and has some of those details that I was talking about. Alright, lastly, I'm going to try and show you what I am wearing. This dress was made for me actually, but I wanted to show you what a border print was. So when you have, it's got details here, but the main thing is that there is a large border along the hem of the skirt. Okay, now that you know some of the things that make pieces a little bit more special than just your run-of-the-mill vintage, we're going to move on to two other pricing methods, and the first one of those is the retail pricing method. So this method is going to be taking a piece and estimating what it would go for retail modern day. This is best for trendier or designer pieces that you can kind of get an idea from modern websites what pieces like that are going for in today's market, because as we know, fashion is cyclical and a lot of vintage pieces inspire the pieces made for the modern market today. And you would price your item at the price you would see if you pulled it off the rack at, say, Urban Outfitters, Anthropologie, Madewell, some sort of store that's going to be like, I hate to call Anthropologie middle priced, but it's not designer. So like a higher end mall store. That's the kind of thing that you want to be pricing your item at. We're not talking about like Forever 21 sort of retail prices. We're talking a little bit more mid-range than that. And then of course you want to remember to discount for flaws, discounting the item to reflect those damages. So I'm going to show you a piece that would work with. Alright, so I've got two pieces here. The first one, let's just say you could easily find this skirt at Madewell or Urban Outfitters. It is by No Excuses. It's from the 90s. So I would look at this skirt and I would go on Madewell's website and I would see what they're charging for a skirt like this, and that is how I would price it. If it seems too high, then take a percentage off and price it a little bit lower. No one is ever going to be upset about a lower price. A dress like this is a 1960s maxi dress. You could easily see this at Anthropologie. So if I go to Anthropologie's website and I look for a maxi dress with like a chiffon overlay, a cool print, what is that going to retail for? And that's how I'm going to price this piece. So now you know 2 of my methods for pricing vintage. Before we go on to the third one, I'm going to talk about one more thing, and that is things that devalue your vintage items. Not trying to clean or fix issues on a vintage piece devalues it. So if it is flawed and you don't want to try to fix it because you don't know if you will damage the piece, and you disclose that in the listing, don't try and ask full price for it. Make sure to keep in mind that whoever gets it is going to have that knowledge that you don't have to try and fix and repair that piece. That is going to take them time. If they are going to pay full price, full retail price for a piece, then they're going to want it to be in pristine condition, just like you would when you got it from the store. If you went into Anthropologie and there was a piece and it had a huge gash in it, and you know how to fix that, you're still not going to pay full price for it, right? You're going to ask them for a discount. So keep that in mind when you are pricing your vintage. Another thing that can bring down the value of your item is poorly lit photos or a dingy background. If you are just like throwing it on your bed or just hanging it on your closet, if you don't have a dress form that you are putting it on, or you are not modeling the piece, I would say that devalues your vintage somewhat. Sometimes hanger pictures can look great, but when it comes to showing off fine details of a piece, I would say that putting in that extra effort to take those really nice photos are what is going to bring your vintage up to the level that you can ask that full retail price for it. And another thing that devalues your vintage is if you don't do any research on it. So if you just want something like an easy flip, if you find a vintage piece at Goodwill and you know that it is vintage but you don't know the era, you don't really know a whole lot about it, and you just want a quick flip because you're not a vintage seller, don't expect to get a crazy high price for it because you're not putting in the effort to identify and properly tag and provide that information to your buyer. Okay, we're on to the last method. This method is the one that a lot of people do talk about. It is one that you are going to be familiar with, but it is not appropriate for every vintage situation, and that is the comps method. So finding out comparable sold or comparable active listings to the item that you have. This is going to be best for price ranges. So if you have, let's say, a 1970s prairie maxi dress and you want to find out what range of prices people are listing those in, then you could do a search that way and just sort of take an average and try and price yours in a way that reflects how much time and effort and research you put into selling and listing the piece. It's really great for designer pieces or unique prints. So if you find a Seal Chapman dress, you're going to want to do some research on it. You're going to want to look up comps. You're going to want to see what others have sold for recently in the sort of style vein that you are selling your dress in. So if it, or other item, like if it's a 1950s Seal Chapman wedding dress, what have others gone for? You're not going to find the exact same piece, so don't try to do that. What you're looking for is similar solds. And you always want to start your vintage research on Etsy, not for era, but for pricing strategy. Try to avoid shops that don't put a specific era in the description or are very clearly mislabeling their pieces. Those are not going to be reliable sources of information or reliable sources of comps. So when you are taking your comps and you're just kind of scanning through, if you have a nicer piece, make sure to click on that shop, find out, you know, what kind of details they're putting in to their description and whether or not they're reputable, like if they have a lot of feedback, etc. And you can kind of use that to determine how valid their pricing is. Always start on Etsy, even if you don't sell on Etsy. So if you only sell on Poshmark, if you only sell on Depop, if you only sell on eBay, start on Etsy. Etsy is where people are going to get the most for their vintage as common everyday sellers. Other sites that you can use to research vintage and vintage sold prices, Tradesy is a good one. eBay, of course. And then if you come upon a designer piece, First Dibs is also good for that. Although I will say that to sell on First Dibs, you have to be like an authenticated vintage seller. Most of these sellers have stores, and a lot of First Dibs clientele are celebrities or people with a lot of money, essentially. So I will say take the First Dibs pricing with a grain of salt. If you see something on First Dibs for $1,500, you have a piece by the same designer, that does not mean that you should list it on Poshmark for $1,500. So a lot of people talk about how you can't see sold prices on Etsy, and that is actually not true. So if you go to the website Flipper Tools, you will see an Etsy tab, and you can put in the URL of this sold Etsy listing, and it will tell you how much it's sold for. And then I'm not sure if it tells you the year that it sold, but that is also helpful too, because sometimes things do get more rare. I know that vintage dresses from the 1950s go for more money now than they did when I first started selling vintage, and I've only been doing this for whatever, like 8 years, so things do go up and things do go down. And again, I just want to specify, when you're doing the comps method, you will virtually never find the exact same item that you are trying to sell. So just look for similar, as close as you can get, and that will kind of give you an idea. So I'm going to show you a couple of pieces where I think the comps method would work. Okay, so the first piece is going to be this 1950s dress, and these roses are embroidered. And this is a black, I think, nylon crepe material. It's got very nice lines, nice tailoring through here. It has this like sash over it, and the embroidery goes through to the skirt. It is tailored in the back. It has the metal zipper back here, and it does not have a maker tag, only a lot with a size. This is a piece that I would use the comps method. If I were going to try and sell it, I would look for other 1950s dresses that have been embroidered. I would look for dresses with this sash. I would look for little black dresses. I would never use the 6.5 times rounded method on this dress, because I actually found this at the Salvation Army. It was a very rare thrift find, but I only paid, I believe, $8 for it. So I would never in a million years list it for under $50. And that is why I think that you should pay attention to special details when you are pricing your vintage, to make sure that you are using the right pricing method. This is another piece where I would use the comps method. You could also use the retail method for this one, but it is a 1970s jumpsuit with a printed polka dot and a ruffle front with a crochet trim edge. And it is, okay, let's see if I can show you. It is a super duper gigantic wide-legged jumpsuit. You can see that there is a actual slimmer leg in here made of more opaque fabric. See there? That's the leg. So basically when you wear this, it looks like a maxi dress, but it is pants, which is the best. And yeah, again, I would use the comps method to price this. I would do research on the brand, which is Miss Elliott, California. And I would do research on 1970s cotton maxi jumpsuits and see what other people are pricing those at. I would look for wide leg, I would look for polka dot, and then I would just kind of come out with like an average price. Me being more of like a vintage seller, I would price on the middle high end, not over the top, but definitely not on the lower side. And that would be another one that I would use the comps method for. And if I was not coming up with good results for the comps method, let's just say I couldn't find anything even remotely similar to this, I would use the retail method, because I very much think that this is something that you could go into Anthropologie and purchase. And I would look for a wide leg cotton jumpsuit from Anthropologie and price it at the retail price that they would be asking. Now, as we wrap up this video, I want to go over a couple of things that I think that it is really important to take note of. The first being that sellers who specialize in vintage are willing to sit on pieces for a very long time to get the price that they are looking for. So it is important to take into account when you are looking on Etsy for those solds, and you see one that is really great, but you are just a casual seller who doesn't want to sit on something for more than 3 or 4 months, you might not get that price. And that's not me trying to be mean, that's just me saying that I, as a vintage seller, have sat on pieces for 2, 3, 4 years waiting for the right person to come along. And if that piece is special enough, I will not get rid of it at a discounted price, because I know that there is a buyer out there, and I may need to change pictures or tags or keywords, but the piece that I am trying to sell is worth sitting on. That is often how Etsy sellers command the price that they ask for, is they wait until the right buyer comes along, and sometimes it takes years, and if you don't have that kind of patience, that is a-okay. Just don't expect that top dollar sale, and maybe price a little bit more moderately, and then be willing to take offers. Perhaps the most important, and that is that selling vintage is a labor of love. We do it because we love it. We do it because we want to save these pieces. They're spectacular. They're fashion history. We love them. And if you are just a seller who wants to sell a thing here or there, you know, that's great. But people who sell vintage exclusively, you can almost always expect them to have prices that are a little bit higher. And that is because of the knowledge and the love and the time and the care that goes into selling those pieces and offering them for the right buyer. Okay, so that was, you know, page and a half of notes and some examples of vintage and how to price it. And I hope this video was really helpful. If you are a new Etsy seller, a Poshmark seller, a Depop seller, wherever, these methods can still apply. And I hope that you are able to comfortably price your vintage now. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I do not do individual valuations, but if you have a general question, I will do my best to answer it. And I hope that I will see you in my next video, and that you will hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time. Bye!